Hi, my name is Ellie Dashwood and this is another episode of Dashy Notes. Today we'll be talking about forms of address in period dramas and classic literature. Oh, Mr. Darcy. He's just so wonderful. He has a beautiful estate, good manners. Well, by the end of the book he has good manners. And such a noble sounding name, doesn't he? Mr. Darcy. But does he have a first name? If you really think about it, everyone calls him Mr. Darcy. Lizzie, Bingley, even his aunt calls him Darcy. Did his mom not give him a first name, or is he just too stuck up to use it? Those are good questions, and today we'll be answering them for you right here on Dashy Notes, where we answer your modern day questions about classic literature. So does Mr. Darcy have a first name? Yes, he does. It is Fitzwilliam. Doesn't that sound noble? You probably recognize Mr. Darcy's first name, Fitzwilliam, as his cousin Colonel Fitzwilliam's last name. But why does he have his cousin's last name as his first name? Because it was his mother's maiden name, and since it was a name of distinction, he was given it as his first name, as sort of like a hereditary nod to her family. So if his first name is Fitzwilliam, then why does no one call him Fitzwilliam? They're always calling him Darcy. In fact, we only have 2 instances in the book where we learn his name at all, and one of them is when he signs that passionate letter he writes to Elizabeth defending himself against all of her slanderous lies about him. The answer lies in the social customs of Victorian and Georgian England. England of 1800s had a lot of strict rules about names, titles, honorifics, and all of those things that seem very, very different from today. So today we'll be going over sort of 4 rule areas with regard to names so we can understand them better. 1 is titles and respect. 2 is dealing with multiples. 3 is first names. And 4 is love and marriage. First, forms of address and respect. So coming from our modern sensibilities where we run around calling everyone by their first name, it might seem extremely formal and stiff when we watch period dramas or we read classic literature. Here we have Mrs. Bennet and all those like her running around calling their husbands by their title and last name, aka Mr. Bennet, aka Mr. Bennet, my poor nurse! Hopefully not all the wives are that dramatic though. But really we have to understand the Regency mindset to appreciate why they did this. It was an era where they were very, very concerned with stuff like honor and respect. And calling someone by their title and last name was a sign of respect and honor and their position in society, even if you were related to them. Usually the use of a first name was very limited and it denoted either a highly close relationship such as siblings or very close friends, or it was even a mark of disrespect or lower honor in that often servants were called by their first name before they worked their way up to the high ranking of being either like the head housekeeper or the butler, at which point they got the dignity of being called by their last name. So in this video we'll be talking more about the titles Mr., Mrs., and Miss, and I'll leave the other more peerage titles such as Lord and Lady and Duke and Duchess and all those for another episode of Dashy Notes. Just very looking forward to that one. I will tell you in that one about how I almost met a duchess once. Yep, me. Yeah, I know. It's quite exciting. So have you ever wondered what the term Mr. came from? Well, it's simply a title that's been used in England for a very long time, and it's the rank below a baronet. AKA, if you don't make it up to baronet, then you just get to be a Mr. and below. And what about Mrs. and Miss? Where did those come from? Well, Mrs. and Miss are both contractions of the word mistress. Okay, so if you watch Masterpiece Theater's Poldark, which if you don't, I suggest you should, you get to see them use the full term mistress a lot. They're always calling Demelza or Elizabeth Mistress Poldark, because in reality the term Mrs. is just a shortened form of mistress. Also, Miss is another shortened form of mistress, only Miss applies to women who are not married. Mrs. of course applies to women who are married. Also, if you're a servant and you reach a certain rank in a household, such as being the head housekeeper or the head nanny, or even maybe the cook in a really big household, then you get to be called Mrs. Even if you're single, because it's just such a title of distinction. Now, have you ever wondered, is there a male equivalent of Miss? Sort of like there's Mr. and Mrs. and then there's Miss, and then the answer is yes, there is, and it is master. You may have seen this in some period dramas or in some classic books you've read, where they call a young man who's not come of age yet master, and that is the term for it. It's fallen mostly out of use today. You don't really see anyone calling anyone master, and even if you did, that would sound kind of weird. So we actually see this in Return to Cranford, where Tom Hiddleston plays, I believe his character's named William Buxton, and the old ladies are like, oh, Master Buxton's come back. Only he's all grown up now, and they're like, oh, he's not Master Buxton anymore. He's Mr. Buxton. Because unlike Miss, which transitions from Miss to Mrs. upon marriage, men transfer from Master to Mr. upon growing up and becoming an adult. Part 2, dealing with multiples. Okay, so we've established that Regency England, to show people honor, we're gonna call them Mr., Miss, Mrs., then their last name. But what if there's a bunch of them? Like in the Bennet family, there's like 5 girls. Are they all Miss Bennet? How do you keep them straight? And here enters the rule for multiples with siblings, which is the oldest sibling gets to simply have the honor of being title plus last name. Henceforth, Jane Bennet, since she's the oldest, gets to be Miss Bennet. However, her younger siblings have to be title, first name, last name. That's why when they're introduced, there is Miss Bennet, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, Miss Mary Bennet, Miss Catherine Bennet, and Miss Lydia Bennet. That all changes when one of the older sisters get married. So when both Elizabeth and Jane get married, that means the next oldest girl in line is Mary. So Mary now gets to be Miss Bennet, and Kitty's just stuck being Miss Catherine Bennet. Honestly, I think Miss Catherine Bennet, though, is gonna make a much better match than Miss Mary Bennet. Gotta feel kind of sorry for her. And the same rule applies to guys. For example, in Mansfield Park, we have 2 sons, and the older one, Tom, gets to be Mr. Bertram, and the younger one is Mr. Edmund Bertram. Only the whole marriage thing doesn't work there because guys' last names don't change, so he's gonna be stuck being Mr. Edmund Bertram for a long time. So part 3, first names. So we have all these rules, all these people being title plus last name. Did they ever use their first name? Well, of course they did, but just like everything else, there was rules to this too. Firstly, women were more likely to be on a first name basis with their friends and family than men were. That's why we see so many people calling Elizabeth Lizzie in Pride and Prejudice. Meanwhile, most men, the most endearing people got to them was that they left off the title and just called them by their last name. So if you were Mr. Darcy's really, really best friend, you got to move up to calling him Darcy. I know, it's so much like closer than Mr. Darcy. And this is really demonstrated well in the newer version of Emma with Romola Gary, when Mrs. Elton comes along and calls Mr. Knightley Knightley, and she barely met him, and Emma's just like, I have known Mr. Knightley my entire life and I don't even call him that. Yeah, it's quite an outrage. It's like, she dropped off Mr. What does she think, that they're best friends? That is getting too close right there. So one of the exceptions in the first name world is if you're siblings, cousins, or childhood friends that grew up together. Since children were often called by their first name while they grew up, friends who grew up together were used to calling each other by their first name too. We see different examples of this principle play out. For example, with brother and sister, we have Mary Crawford, who always calls her brother Henry. We also, in Mansfield Park, have Fanny Price, who calls her cousin Edmund, because they're cousins and they grew up together. In Emma, we have a great example of childhood friends calling each other by their first name, or in fact, this one is a little bit different, because Emma and Mr. Knightley were somewhat children at the same time, because he was 16 when she was born, but they still sort of grew up childhood friends. And so that's why he calls her Emma, but she calls him Mr. Knightley because he's still so much older than her. And of course, this is also why Mr. Collins can come in and start talking to his cousin Elizabeth by her first name, because it's his cousin, which I'm not quite a fan of the rule in that area when it comes to Mr. Collins. Part 4, love and marriage. So outside of siblings and childhood friends, it really was not appropriate for a man to call a lady by her first name unless they were engaged. In fact, if a guy started calling you by like your first name and you weren't engaged to him, you'd be like, are you asking me to marry you? I'm kind of confused. I don't know what's happening here. So much drama is happening in the Regency England of my imagination, apparently. But we see this in Pride and Prejudice, because as soon as Mr. Darcy proposes to Lizzie again and she accepts him, he says, "My sweetest, loveliest Elizabeth." And that right there is him immediately jumping on the chance to use her first name, because up until that time, he did not have the social right to, but now he can call her Elizabeth. But have you ever noticed, even though he starts calling her Elizabeth, she still calls him Darcy? One reason could be because nobody uses his first name, and that'd be kind of weird to start all of a sudden. But we still see that high level of formality, even between wives and husbands, where they would call each other by their first name in private, but in company or when talking to someone else, they still refer to him as Mr. or Mrs. so-and-so. So she would be like, Mr. Darcy is home, you know, to my giant mansion. So in conclusion, does Mr. Darcy have a first name? Yes. Yes, he does. It is Fitzwilliam. But he doesn't hear that name often because of the very formal way people were addressed during Regency England time. And that's why a lot of people don't even know he has a first name, because it's hidden deep in the secrets of Pride and Prejudice. Okay, it's not that secret. You just, you know, open the book and look for it, but still, it's unknown to many. So in the comments below, tell me, what would your name and title be if you lived in Regency England? I would of course be Miss Dashwood because I'm the oldest, and I would be Miss Dashwood until I got married, and then of course I'd be Mrs. Darcy. Okay, no, not really. I think if I was really gonna marry like any of Jane Austen's heroes, I'd want to marry Henry Tilney. So I guess I'd be Mrs. Tilney, but still, that's not, I don't know, Mrs. Tilney. Interesting thoughts there. Okay, so thank you again for watching my episode of Dashy Notes. My name is Ellie Dashwood, and I hope this has answered a modern day question you have about classic literature. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos about Jane Austen, classic literature, and period dramas, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Check me out on Instagram at Ellie Dashy, because that's where I post stuff and stuff. So if you want to see stuff about stuff, go there and stuff.